The pie sat on the counter, a perfect golden brown testament to a love they no longer recognized. My knuckles ached from kneading the dough, the way my mother had taught me, and my fingers were stained purple from the wild Idaho huckleberries I had painstakingly picked and preserved last summer. It was a peace offering, a desperate, foolish attempt to remind my son Tyler of the boy he used to be. But when I placed it on the table, his face, the one I had memorized in every stage from infancy to manhood, twisted into a mask of disgust. "We don't eat that garbage anymore, Margaret," he said, the name a cold, formal stone thrown in my face. His wife, Nancy, standing beside him, added with a sneer, "It's a gluten and sugar bomb. Honestly, it's poison." Poison. That's what my love had become to them. In that moment, watching them push away the pie, the symbol of my life's nurturing, I knew it was over. The charade of family I had been clinging to for the past year shattered, and the pieces fell around me like shards of glass. They thought my silence was acceptance. They mistook my grief for weakness. They were about to learn that a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous and creative creature on God's green earth. It all began in the suffocating quiet that followed my husband Frank's death. The sprawling ranch house we had built together, with its wide windows looking out onto the Boise foothills, became a cavern of echoing memories. The silence was an ache, a physical presence. I was so lonely I thought my heart would simply stop beating from the sheer weight of it. Tyler and Nancy were my only family left. They were living in a cramped apartment downtown, complaining constantly about their landlord, their student debt, the unfairness of the world. My idea, born from a mother's foolish, desperate heart, seemed like a perfect solution. I would have life in my house again, and they would have a chance to get ahead. I remember the afternoon I proposed it, my voice full of a hope that now feels like a betrayal of my own intelligence. "Move in with me," I'd said, sitting on the porch Frank had built. "There's so much room. You could save up, get your feet under you, and I wouldn't have to be so alone." Nancy's eyes, a pale, sharp blue, had lit up with a speed that should have been a warning. "Oh, Margaret," she'd purred, her voice a symphony of false modesty. "We couldn't possibly impose. That's too generous." Tyler, my son, had wrapped an arm around my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a comfort then, but feels like a cage in retrospect. "Mom, are you sure? We don't want to be a burden." I had waved their protests away, my heart swelling with the need to be needed. "Nonsense," I'd said. "This house needs a family in it." And so they came, with their moving boxes and their hollow promises. They spoke of taking care of me, of honoring Frank's memory by keeping the house full of life. I believed them. I wanted to believe them so desperately that I ignored the way Nancy's eyes cataloged my possessions, the way Tyler spoke of updates and improvements. I thought I was inviting my family home. I didn't realize I was signing my own eviction notice, not with ink, but with love. I had opened my doors to the invaders, and they had marched in, smiling, ready to conquer. The dismantling of my life was a slow, methodical process, a campaign of 1,000 small cuts, each one delivered with a placating smile. The first casualty was Frank's rose garden. He had planted a new bush for me every anniversary for 40 years, a vibrant, fragrant timeline of our life together. I came home from a trip to Walmart one afternoon to find Tyler standing in the yard next to a pile of uprooted, dying rose bushes. "Decided to clear this out, Margaret," he announced as if discussing the weather. "We're going to put in a minimalist Zen garden. Nancy saw one online. It's going to be much more low maintenance and modern." I stared at the carnage, at 40 years of love ripped from the earth, and I couldn't speak. "Don't look so sad, Mom," Nancy had said, coming out of the house with a glass of iced tea. "It was just a bunch of old flowers. This will be much more sophisticated." Sophisticated. My life, my memories, my love, they were unsophisticated. The improvements soon moved inside. The comfortable, worn armchair where Frank had read the paper every morning was replaced by a stark white leather cube that was as uncomfortable as it was ugly. "It's from a designer in Seattle," Nancy had explained, as if that made the erasure of my husband's favorite spot acceptable. My collection of landscape paintings, mostly local Idaho artists Frank and I had collected over the years, were taken down and relegated to a dusty pile in the attic. "They just don't go with the color story we're creating," Tyler had said, patching the nail holes with a casual indifference that made my stomach clench. The house was being stripped of its soul, of my soul, layer by painful layer. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, became a foreign territory. The scent of my baking, the comforting aroma of a simmering pot of stew, was replaced by the alien smell of their strange, joyless health foods. My cooking was met with thinly veiled disgust. The meatloaf Frank had loved was a heart attack on a plate. The pot of grits I made one morning was empty carbs. They were living in my house, eating food bought with the pension Frank had worked his entire life for, and they were treating me like a backward, unhealthy relic they were forced to tolerate. I tried to hold my ground. I tried to voice my feelings. "Nancy, that vase was my mother's," I'd say, my voice trembling. "Oh, I know," she'd reply with a bright false smile. "I've put it somewhere safe. It just doesn't work with the new minimalist vibe." Minimalist, that's what they called it. The systematic eradication of my existence. I was being minimized, made smaller and smaller in my own home. I found myself spending more and more time in my bedroom, the one room they hadn't yet touched. I would sit on my bed and listen to the sounds of my life being dismantled, the scrape of furniture being moved, the murmur of their voices planning the next improvement. The injustice of it was a slow burning fire in my chest. I had invited them in to cure my loneliness, and they had responded by making me a stranger in my own life. I was surrounded by people, yet I had never felt more profoundly alone. Their conquest of my physical space was soon followed by a quiet, insidious takeover of my financial independence. It was a masterfully executed maneuver, cloaked in the language of love and concern. They sat me down at the cold glass dining table that had replaced our sturdy oak one, and Tyler laid out a stack of my bills with a solemn expression. "Mom," he began, his voice a carefully calibrated instrument of sincerity, "we were just looking at all this, and it seems like a lot for you to manage. We're worried about you." Nancy reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was cold. "We just want to make things easier for you, Margaret. What if we helped you consolidate everything? We could create a joint household account. All the bills could be paid automatically. Your pension could go right in. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." A knot of dread tightened in my gut. Frank had been a meticulous planner. He had left me financially secure, independent. My savings, my pension, they were the last bastions of my autonomy. To cede control of that felt like a final, irreversible surrender. "I'm perfectly capable of paying my own bills, Tyler," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Of course you are, Mom," he soothed, his tone dripping with a condescending sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "No one is saying you're not. This is about family helping family. It's about us taking some of the burden off your shoulders, so you can relax and enjoy your retirement." They were so skilled at twisting my competence into a burden they needed to lift. They framed their power grab as an act of loving care. To refuse would be to seem paranoid, to shatter the fragile illusion of the happy family I so desperately wanted to believe in, and so, against the screaming alarms in my own soul, I relented. The trip to the bank was a surreal out-of-body experience. Tyler did all the talking, charming the young bank manager with a story about setting up a family estate plan to make things easier for his beloved mother. I signed the documents where he told me to, my signature on the page looking like a betrayal of everything Frank and I had built. The moment I did, the floodgates of my life savings were thrown open. At first they maintained the pretense of responsibility. The utility bills were paid. But then the bank statements, which they started trying to hide from me, began to tell a different story. There were charges for expensive dinners at restaurants in downtown Boise. There were online shopping sprees at high-end boutiques. There was a withdrawal for a down payment on a brand-new luxury pickup truck for Tyler, a vehicle far more extravagant than anything Frank and I had ever owned. I found a statement they had carelessly left on the counter and confronted them, my hand shaking as I pointed to a charge for several $1,000s from a designer store in Chicago. "What is this, Nancy?" I asked. "I've never bought anything from this store." She glanced at the statement, and then at me, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Oh, that was for my new work wardrobe," she said casually. "I have to look professional. It's a family investment. My money, my security, my future." It had become their personal slush fund, their family investment in a lifestyle I had no part in. The injustice of it was a physical sensation, a constant dull ache in my chest. I had given them my home, my trust, and now my financial freedom. I was funding my own erasure, paying for the very chains that were binding me, and they had the audacity to tell me it was an investment in family. The walls of my world were closing in, and Nancy seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in being the one to lay the bricks. Having conquered my home and my finances, she set about methodically dismantling my social life, ensuring that I would be completely and utterly alone, dependent only on them. My friends, the women who had been my bedrock for decades, were her first targets. My weekly bridge game with my best friend Monica was a sacred ritual, a few hours of laughter and gossip that kept my spirits afloat. "Margaret," Nancy announced one Tuesday, her tone bright and final, "Tyler and I are going to start hosting a little weekly get-together for some of his work colleagues. We'll need the living room on Wednesday evenings, so you'll have to reschedule your little card game." I was stunned into silence. "But we've played on Wednesdays for 20 years, I finally managed to say. "Well, things change," she replied with a dismissive shrug. "This is important for Tyler's career." It was a lie, of course. The get-together happened exactly once, but the point had been made. My life, my routines, my friendships, they were all subordinate to their whims. I made the humiliating phone calls, offering my friends flimsy excuses that I knew they didn't believe. My small circle of joy was broken. Monica, bless her stubborn, loyal heart, was not so easily dissuaded. She knew something was wrong and kept trying to reach me. But Nancy became a master of interception, a gatekeeper of my isolation. I would listen from my bedroom as Nancy would answer my phone, her voice a symphony of feigned concern. "Oh, Monica, I'm so sorry Margaret is just not up for visitors today. She's having one of her bad days. Her memory has been a little foggy lately. The doctor says it's best to keep her environment calm and quiet." It was a brilliant, diabolical strategy. She was not only isolating me, but also actively building a narrative of my incompetence. She was discrediting me in advance, ensuring that if I ever did manage to cry for help, I would be dismissed as a confused, senile old woman. The world outside my front door became a distant, inaccessible dream. They had sold my car, claiming it was unsafe, leaving me completely reliant on them for transportation, a service they rarely provided. A trip to the Target for toiletries became a complicated negotiation that often ended with, "We'll try to get to it this weekend, Margaret." My world shrank until it was contained within the four walls of the house, and within those walls I was a prisoner. The loneliness was no longer a passive state of being, it was an actively enforced condition. It was the excruciating loneliness of being constantly surrounded by people who wished you would simply vanish. They no longer bothered with the pretense of conversation. They talked over me, around me, about me, as if I were a piece of furniture that happened to be breathing. Their cruelty became casual, a part of the daily routine. Tyler would mansplain the news to me as if I were a child. Nancy would helpfully organize my closet, donating items she deemed too old-fashioned. I was being infantilized and erased, my identity worn away by the constant daily friction of their disrespect. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting the memories of a life they were systematically bulldozing to make way for their own. It was the pie that finally broke me, not a single dramatic act of cruelty, but the quiet, dismissive rejection of the one thing I thought I could still offer, a taste of home, a memory of love. For weeks I had been feeling more and more like a ghost, a transparent, irrelevant presence in the vibrant modern world they were building in my house. I decided in a moment of desperate, foolish hope to try and reach them, to remind them of the family we once were. I decided to bake a pie. Not just any pie, a wild huckleberry pie. Tyler's favorite. It was a recipe my own mother had taught me, a taste of his childhood, a symbol of a simpler, happier time. The huckleberries were from a batch I had picked and frozen the summer before, a secret stash of sweetness I had been saving. Baking that pie was an act of prayer. I kneaded the dough with hands that ached, praying that the familiar motions would conjure some flicker of recognition in him. I stirred the purple filling, praying that the sweet aroma would stir some dormant memory of a time when he had looked at me with love instead of annoyance. The pie came out of the oven perfect, the crust a flaky golden brown, the filling bubbling with a deep, jewel-toned richness. It was more than a dessert, it was an offering. It was my heart on a plate. I waited until after dinner, a joyless meal of steamed fish and quinoa they had prepared. My moment came. With trembling hands I brought the pie to the table. "I made something special," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "for dessert." Tyler looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild irritation at being interrupted. He glanced at the pie, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, maybe even a hint of the boy he used to be. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cool, practiced disdain. Nancy looked at the pie as if it were a dead rodent on the table. "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity, "you know we don't eat things like that." That's when Tyler delivered the final, fatal blow. He didn't even look at me. He just waved a dismissive hand in the direction of the pie, my offering, my heart. "We don't eat that garbage anymore, Margaret," he said, the use of my first name, a deliberate distancing sting. "It's full of sugar and gluten. We're on a clean diet." Honestly, that stuff is poison. Poison. My love, my memories, my last, desperate attempt to connect. It was poison. The pie sat on the table between us, a symbol of a bridge that was not just burned, but completely annihilated. The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of his words, of her sneer, of their complete and utter rejection, crushed the last bit of hope out of me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply stood there, my hands at my sides, and felt something inside me go cold and still. The loving mother, the grieving widow, the woman who had always believed in the power of forgiveness and family, she died in that moment. And in her place, something else began to stir. Something quiet, something hard, and something utterly, unshakably resolved. They had finally succeeded in erasing me, but they had made a critical mistake. They had forgotten that even a ghost can learn to haunt the house it was murdered in. Insult. It was a clarification. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence that I was no longer a mother in their eyes. I was an inconvenience, a relic, a producer of garbage. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in my small bedroom, the one they had relegated me to, and I did not weep. I planned. A cold, quiet fury had settled in my heart, a feeling so clean and sharp, it was almost exhilarating. They thought I was a defeated old woman. They had no idea that they had just awakened a sleeping giant. The foundation of my plan was a simple, beautiful fact they had overlooked in their arrogant conquest: the deed to the house. It was in my name, and mine alone. Frank and I had paid off the mortgage a decade ago. Legally, the castle they had so confidently claimed as theirs was built on land I owned outright. My first move was to re-establish contact with the outside world. I started taking the bus to the Boise Public Library, telling Nancy and Tyler I had joined a senior knitting circle. They were thrilled, happy to have me out of the house for a few hours. At the library, I used the public computers to do my research. I taught myself about property law, about tenancy rights, about the legal definition of financial elder abuse. I printed out every bank statement from the past year, meticulously highlighting their fraudulent purchases. I was building a case, a fortress of facts that would be unassailable. My next step was to call my oldest friend Monica. I used a payphone, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Monica," I said, my voice a low whisper. "It's Margaret. I'm in trouble, and I'm ready to fight back." There was no hesitation in her voice, only a fierce, protective anger. "It's about time," she said. "Tell me what you need." Monica became my general, my co-conspirator. She helped me find a lawyer, a woman named Ms. Albright, who had a reputation for being a shark in family court. Our first meeting was in a discreet coffee shop far from my neighborhood. I laid out my file on the table, the deed, the bank statements, a notebook where I had started documenting every slight, every act of cruelty. Ms. Albright reviewed it all, her expression growing colder with each page. When she looked up, her eyes were like chips of ice. "Margaret," she said, "they haven't just been disrespectful. They've been breaking the law. We are going to take back everything." Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. The plan she outlined was not just about getting them out of my house. It was about holding them accountable for every single thing they had done. It was a plan of quiet, legal, and devastatingly effective warfare. I had to continue playing the part of the meek, forgetful old woman at home, a role I now embraced with a chilling sense of purpose. My quietness was no longer a sign of defeat. It was a strategy. My invisibility was my greatest weapon. While they were living their lives, secure in their belief that they had won, I was silently assembling the pieces of the bomb that was about to detonate under their feet. They thought they had buried me. They didn't know they had only planted a seed of righteous fury, and it was about to bloom in the most spectacular way imaginable. The execution of the plan required me to become a master of espionage in my own home. I was a spy, gathering intelligence while playing the role of a harmless, doddering old woman. My compliance became my camouflage. I shuffled when I walked. I forgot where I put my reading glasses. I would ask them to repeat things, feigning a hearing loss that I did not have. They loved it. My apparent decline confirmed their narrative and soothed their guilt. "Poor Mom is really slipping," I heard Nancy say to Tyler one evening, her voice laced with a pity that was as false as her designer handbag. While they were congratulating themselves on their victory, My war was being waged in secret. With Ms. Albright's guidance, I took the first, most crucial step. I cut off their funding. I went to a different bank, opened a new account in my name only, and had my pension redirected. Then, as the sole legal owner of the original accounts, I had both Tyler and Nancy's names removed, freezing their access to the funds they had been so freely plundering. I did this on a Wednesday. I knew they had a car payment due on Friday. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited for the explosion, but it didn't come immediately. They were too proud, too arrogant to admit to me that their cards were being declined. Instead, the atmosphere in the house grew thick with a new kind of tension. There were hushed, angry phone calls behind closed doors. There were no more shopping bags from expensive stores appearing in the hallway. Nancy started cooking again. Simple, cheap meals of pasta and rice, her resentment simmering along with the sauce. They were beginning to feel the squeeze, and they had no idea where it was coming from. The next phase of the plan was the house itself. "We are not going to evict them," Ms. Albright had advised, a cunning smile on her face. "An eviction can be fought, delayed. It's messy. We are going to do something much cleaner. We are going to sell the house." The idea was breathtaking in its audacity. We hired a real estate agent who specialized in discreet sales. There would be no for sale sign on the lawn, no open houses for the neighbors to gossip about. The agent, a calm professional named Richard, would market the property directly to pre-qualified cash buyers. Richard's cover story was brilliant. He presented himself to Tyler and Nancy as an insurance assessor, sent to do a full evaluation of the property for a policy renewal. They bought it completely, even boasting to him about the upgrades they had made. They proudly showed him the Zen garden where my roses used to be, the minimalist living room, the cold, modern kitchen. They were unwittingly giving a sales tour of the kingdom they were about to lose. I watched it all from the sidelines, a silent, invisible player. I would sit in my small room, listening to Richard's footsteps as he walked through the house with potential buyers, my heart pounding a rhythm of terror and triumph. It was a high-wire act, and a single misstep could bring it all crashing down. But their arrogance was my greatest ally. They never suspected a thing. They were too busy worrying about their mysterious financial problems to pay any real attention to the insurance man. The offer came in faster than any of us had expected. A young family, relocating to Boise from the East Coast, fell in love with the house's bones and its beautiful view of the foothills. They made a full cash offer, well over the asking price, and they wanted to close in 2 weeks. The countdown had begun. The final days leading up to the sale were a masterclass in emotional endurance. I had to maintain my performance as the docile, faded woman they believed me to be, while inside, my heart was a whirlwind of anxiety and anticipation. Every creak of the floorboards, every unexpected phone call, sent a jolt of panic through me. But I held my ground, my face a placid mask, my spirit a coiled spring. The closing took place on a Friday morning at Ms. Albright's downtown office. I dressed with care, choosing a simple but elegant navy blue suit that I hadn't worn in years. It felt like armor. I signed the documents with a hand that was surprisingly steady. The ownership of my home, the physical container of my entire life, was transferred to a new family. As the title agent pushed the cashier's check across the table, a number with so many zeros it seemed unreal, I felt not a thrill of victory, but a profound, grounding sense of peace. The war was over. I had won. Now all that remained was for the enemy to be informed of their surrender. We had decided that the new owners, the Millers, would be the ones to deliver the news. It was cleaner that way, less personal, and in a way more devastating. They were not being evicted by a scorned mother. They were being displaced by the simple, irrefutable fact of a legal property transaction. The Millers were scheduled to arrive with their moving truck at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. I had slipped out of the house the night before, under the cover of darkness, with my one small suitcase. Monica was waiting for me at the end of the street, and I spent the night at her house, a warrior resting before the final battle report came in. At 10:05 a.m. on Saturday, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and answered. "Mom." Tyler's voice was a raw, ragged scream of disbelief and fury. "What did you do?" "There is a moving truck in our driveway. A family is standing on the porch with a deed. They're saying they own the house. This is insane." I let the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke, my voice as calm and cool as the surface of a deep lake. "It's not insane, Tyler. It's a real estate transaction. I sold the house. There was a sputtering, choking sound on the other end of the line. I could hear Nancy in the background, her voice rising in a hysterical shriek. "You can't do that," Tyler yelled, his voice cracking. "This is our home. We live here." "No, dear," I said, my voice quiet but laced with steel. "You lived there, in my house, as my guests, and your visit is over. The people on your porch are the new legal owners. They have a court-ordered notice for you to vacate the premises immediately. I suggest you comply before they are forced to involve the sheriff. You can't just throw us out. We'll sue you. We have rights," he blustered, his rage collapsing into impotent threats. "Actually, Tyler, you don't," I said, channeling Ms. Albright's calm authority. "You were tenants at will. You had no lease. You have no legal claim to the property. You have only what you came with," which, as I recall, wasn't much. I could hear him breathing heavily, the sound of a man whose entire world was collapsing around him. You planned this," he whispered, the dawning horror in his voice a sweet, bitter vindication. "You're a monster." "No, son," I said softly, the last word feeling foreign in my mouth. "I'm just the woman whose favorite pie you called garbage. Enjoy your new life. I know I'll enjoy mine." I hung up the phone. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt the profound, hollowing relief of a great weight being lifted from my soul. The house was no longer my burden, and neither were they. The fallout from their public eviction was spectacular. Monica, getting a blow-by-blow account from her very observant neighbor, relayed the details to me with undisguised glee. The scene on the front lawn of my old house had been a masterwork of suburban drama. Nancy had apparently thrown a full-blown tantrum, screaming and crying while Tyler stood by, pale and shell-shocked. The new owners, the Millers, had been paragons of calm, simply waiting with the police, who had been called to keep the peace, while my son and his wife were forced to frantically pack their lives into a rented moving truck. The entire neighborhood had a front-row seat to the downfall of the golden couple who had so proudly showcased their renovated home. Their humiliation was complete. They had built their kingdom on a foundation of my stolen assets and their own boundless arrogance, and it had been publicly leveled in a single morning. They were forced to move into a cheap, soulless motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and a lingering smell of despair. The luxury pickup truck was repossessed. Their credit cards were maxed out and then canceled. They were financially and socially ruined. They had tried to erase me, and in the end they were the ones who had vanished from the life they had so desperately coveted. As for me, I embarked on the quiet, joyful project of building a new life, a life that was entirely my own. With the proceeds from the sale, I was no longer just comfortable. I was wealthy. But the money was not the prize. The prize was the freedom it represented. I didn't buy a large house. I had learned my lesson about empty rooms. Instead, I bought a beautiful sun-filled condominium in a new development with a community garden, a swimming pool, and a library. It was elegant, manageable, and most importantly, mine. The deed had one name on it, Margaret Davis. The first thing I did was fill my new home with the things I loved. I unpacked my mother's vase, my paintings of the Idaho landscape, my photographs of Frank. I bought a big, comfortable armchair and placed it by the window. I reconnected with my friends. Monica and I re-established our weekly bridge game, and the laughter felt like a long-forgotten song. I was no longer just a mother or a widow. I was Margaret. I was a friend. I was a volunteer at the local animal shelter. I was a woman rediscovering her own interests, her own voice. I was becoming myself again. The poetic justice of their situation was not something I gloated about, but it was a fact I acknowledged with a quiet sense of rightness. They had called my love garbage, and they had been left with nothing but the trash of their own making. They had tried to take my home, and they had ended up homeless. They had tried to steal my future, and they had mortgaged their own into oblivion. I sit on my new balcony now, a cup of freshly brewed coffee in my hand, and I watch the sun climb over the Boise foothills. The air is clean and cool, and the quiet is a comforting blanket, not a suffocating shroud. My life is smaller now, but it is infinitely richer. It is a life of my own design, filled with small, deliberate joys. The scent of the jasmine I've planted in a pot, the weight of a good book in my lap, the easy laughter of friends. I have not heard from Tyler or Nancy directly since that final, explosive phone call. I heard through the grapevine that they eventually left Idaho, chasing some new opportunity in another state, leaving a trail of debt and disgrace behind them. They are ghosts from a past that feels like it belongs to another woman. The anger I once felt has long since faded, replaced by a kind of weary, distant pity. They were so consumed by their own greed, so desperate for a life they felt they were owed, that they destroyed the one person who had ever truly loved them. It is a tragedy of their own making, and they will have to live with the consequences for the rest of their lives. A few months ago, I received a letter, forwarded from Monica. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. It was from Tyler. It was not an apology. It was a rambling, self-pitying account of his hardships, his struggles, his unfair lot in life. It ended with a single stunning sentence. "After everything, I think you owe it to me to help." I read the letter, and then I did something the old Margaret would never have done. I laughed. A real, deep, genuine laugh. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. I took the letter, walked over to the paper shredder Monica had given me as a housewarming gift, and I fed it into the machine. I watched as his words, his entitlement, his complete lack of self-awareness, were turned into a meaningless confetti of paper. My help, my love, my resources, they were no longer his to claim. I had found new places to invest my heart. I had become a significant donor to the Haven House Shelter, the very organization whose name I had used to scare them. I had started a small scholarship fund at the local community college for single mothers going back to school. My legacy would not be a son who despised me. It would be a community I helped to lift up. My story is not one of revenge. It is a story of reclamation. It is the story of a woman who was told she was garbage and remembered that she was treasure. It is a story about the quiet, unshakable power that comes from knowing your own worth, even when those closest to you have forgotten it. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. And as I watch the morning light spill across my garden, I am filled with a profound and lasting peace. They took my pie, but I got to keep my soul, and I have found that it is a far sweeter thing.